Trujillo.
Present.
Counselor David Romero.
Here.
Counselor Barbara Casey.
Here.
Counselor Michael Montoya. For the record, he may join us via Google Meet. And Counselor David Ulivari. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We do have a quorum.
Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'd just like to take a moment of silence to recognize the passing of one of our employees. Mr. Nixon worked at the wastewater department and passed away last week suddenly. Thank you. Nix, right? Excuse me. I'll entertain a motion to approve the agenda, please.
Mr. Mayor, I move that we approve the agenda.
There's a motion on the floor by Ms. Casey. Second, please. Second by Mr. Ulivari. Roll call, please.
Counselor Romero.
Yes.
Counselor Ulivari.
Yes.
Counselor Casey.
Yes.
I have a motion by Counselor Casey, a second by Counselor Ulivari. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Motion carries.
Thank you.
Next on the agenda is public input. We have no public input today. Moving on to our business items. We have one item, discussion and consideration of an emergency water lease contract for bulk purchase of water from Story Lake shareholder Michael Quintana. Mr. Mayor?
Thank you. We've been meeting back and forth regarding occupying some storage space or getting some more water, bulk water from Story Lake. And today we're sort of coming together to see how we move forward and with an agreement to purchase the water from Mr. Quintana. And just called a special meeting because because of timing. If we move forward with this, then Mr. Quintana does not water his portion or use his portion of the lake. So we're all anxious to know which way this is going to go. So I'll entertain any questions or conversations about this. Mr. Montoya, do you have anything to add? No?
No, sir.
Okay. Anyone? Mr. Romero?
Mr. Mayor, I had a question, just going over the resolution that we were just, we were given, but I think we were looking at, what I see here is a bulk purchase, which, originally the intent of this meeting was for a lease. So I don't know if, Mr. City Manager, can you explain where the change was, or the letter of intent?
The language on the top does mention lease contract for bulk purchase of water.
I kind of have the same question, Mr. Mayor. Why do you have the two terms when they're not? Shouldn't it say,
That was the language that our attorney, Pete Dominici, has chosen to put into this document. And he was supposed to be here today, so I
to me,
can't answer.
sale or lease, sale and lease are two different things, so I thought it should say water sale through 2-year lease or water lease through 2-year lease or whatever, but I don't know.
We should probably ask that question to Mr. Dominici if we may.
Mr. Mayor, I guess we can get into the details of the resolution, but I think, I'm glad that we have our experts here, and I'd like to get, for the record, their opinion here on this. I'll give you my things here. I think that we should do a long-term. I know this says a 2-year. To me, I think, all we're doing is, again, Band-Aiding a problem, and if we go 2 years, in 2 years, this could drastically rise. I think it's only fair that our community know that we're looking at long-term and not just, Band-Aiding again, as we have in the past, and those are my issues that I have, but with that, I'd like to hear from our experts what they feel, and, they've had plenty of time as I've noticed, to go over these issues. And I know emails have been sent back and forth, and I'd like to see, what that discussion is here in an open session as to any concerns that they might have, so that we could, be involved in that.
Would anybody like to speak regarding this? And I'm speaking to the consultants that are here. I'm sorry, the audience cannot comment at this time.
I will whenever it's my time. Go ahead.
Okay.
Mayor, if I may, I just want to give a little bit of history on how this document came to what it is today. So in our conversation a couple of weeks ago, it was given to the direction to Mr. Dominici, myself, and Ms. Gilberry to sit down and kind of hammer out all the language that needs to be in this document. In that conversation, we've also included Mr. Mike Hammond, our state water engineer, to include his language into this document, and then maybe they can give some historic knowledge on, or language that was added to this.
Mr. Lazarus?
Mr. Mayor, can you hear me?
Yes.
Councilor Montoya, I just want to make sure people knew that I was on the meeting.
Yeah,
Present,
we heard you log on. Thank you.
okay, and I will be speaking after a while. Thank you.
You might want to turn off any electronic stuff that you have on behind you, Michael. Any radios?
This is the best I'm going to be able to do. Sorry.
Thank you. Jay Lazarus.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Council, Jay Lazarus, Glorieta Geoscience. I'm in full agreement with Councilor Romero that we want a long-term agreement with Story, okay? I look at Story as the ability for the city to grow. When I think of long-term with Story, I think of not just of Mr. Montoya's water rights, but I think of other members of Story Project. I really believe that if the city is going to be able to grow, we need that security of a long-term water supply. I understand that this is a unique situation for a 2-year emergency purchase, which could give us the opportunity then to be able to try and negotiate a very long-term arrangement with Story. I've had this conversation with Mr. Quintana several times that my recommendation, I'd like to at least get like a 40-year lease. I also think, or 40-year, whatever it is. I mean, with a bulk purchase, we don't, and I'm scared now because I got Pete and Mike behind me and I'm going to say something they may correct me on. But for a lease, we have to go through the leasing statute, okay, and have to publish, and there's opportunity for protest. For a bulk water purchase, we don't, because we already have the point of diversion permitted at Story, okay? In fairness to Mr. Quintana, he needs to be able to plan his cropping, his planting. Alfalfa's got a 5-year cycle, and once he plants it, then there's 5 years of cropping there. So I believe in fairness to him and any other farmers there, we should work with them to make sure that their arrangements that they would make with the city will not adversely affect their ability to farm and make a profit on their lands. But I am a very large proponent, as in agreeing with Councilor Romero. I'd like a 40-year lease, and I don't know if we could get a 40-year with another 40-year option. But, for these next couple of years, the way the agreement is written, we'd very much, the state would be paying for it. It wouldn't be coming out of the city's pocket. It wouldn't be creating a precedent for future purchases. But I also think that if we were going to do a 40-year arrangement, it's really important for the city to have carryover from year to year and be able to use the Story Lake conveyance. And I'll stand for any questions.
So you mentioned something that's interesting to me. you said that this agreement wouldn't necessarily set a precedent on price of the water. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
It says specifically, there's language in there, I can grab it and refer to the paragraph. Hold on. It is section 12. Nothing in this agreement is intended to create a precedent for future bulk water purchases and/or use of the Story Intake Canal by the city from SPWA. This emergency water lease is due to conditions set forth in the recitals above, and is unknown if such conditions will apply in the future.
Got you.
Mr. Mayor,
Mr. Montoya?
thank you very much. You know, I'm gonna start with saying that, you know, the town at Red River is right now presently selling water rights to the Ski Valley for $50 an acre. That's to purchase. And then, you know, I think that we're paying 3 to 10 times more than the average going price for water rights or leasing at this time. You know, and I asked Mr. Quintana, about if they would be interested in leasing or selling the water rights. And selling wasn't an option at the time, I guess, but leasing, wanted to request that it would be a 40-year lease at least. And that wasn't an option. And this is the only option that they came up with. You know, I also have asked Mr. Maestas, our city manager, and with the approval of Mayor and Council, that I attend the board's meetings, the Story Lake Association board meetings, because we are members. We own 37 acres feet of water, and we are members of that association. And to this day, I have not been invited to attend any of those meetings or been advised as to when the dates are for those meetings. I also asked repeatedly about that invitation. Anyway, the federal government started this fire. They owe it to us, and they should agree for us to have emergency water leased from the U.S. federal government, the Fish and Wildlife Refuge at Story Lake. They have more water than Quintana and more water than any shareholder there. And they're the ones that caused this problem to begin with. And I think that we need to start talking to them and negotiating for their waters. Also, if we don't lease, if we don't use this water that we're looking at today, because our reservoirs are at what, 80% full, and we don't use this water and we lose it because we don't use it in 1 year's time, you know, we're losing $1 million for this year and then $1 million against next year. And then I do have concerns about the anti-procurement, anti-class donation. You know, I think that, you know, Mr. Quintana is doing this at a good will, but again, you know, we need to include the members of the whole, the board and all the SECIA owners in the Water Association to be fair to them also, to see if they would want to sell or lease any of their water rights, which hasn't gone through. And then the other concern that I have is that we can't bank this water. If we don't use it, we lose it. We can't bank it for the next year or down the road. And I understand for the reasoning behind that. And then so far, I have not seen any confirmation from the state on any funding. I've heard conversations, yes, but to this day, I have not seen anything on letterhead or anything saying that the state will fund this purchase or this lease purchase. And we can't go into an agreement without having that kind of documentation. And then the city of Las Vegas has never had an individual lease before. And that bothers me, and it should go out for an RFP, and anybody in the area can apply for it. And another thing is that on our application permit, that needs to change for the place or the purpose which this water should be already being used for. And that needs to be done before we even purchase the water, because otherwise we might not be able to change that permit of the use of that water. And I'm not really in agreement that this lease purchase price is not going to set precedents. I mean, I've seen it before where, you know, once you appraise a piece of land or water, it stays forever. And I completely understand that the city is willing to have this and have the state fund it, but then what happens after the 2 years? After that, we're looking at water rate increases on the third year going up 20 to 25% because our city budget and utilities is only $5 million. Where are we going to come up with the other 2 million year after year? It's not feasible. And the state don't want to commit to no more than 2 years.
Mr. Montoya,
And Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Hammond has raised his hand.
Okay, and I'll stand for any questions or concerns. I'm almost done, Mr. Mayor. I just want to put out the things that I think that need to be addressed before moving forward. And I request that the city, since day one, look for a long-term solution. You know, this is just a Band-Aid. It's a temporary fix. That's all it is. 2 years go by real quick. I've been in this situation before 17 years ago, where we were leasing water rights from Story Lake for $80,000 a year. Till that purchase took place from the city of Las Vegas, we were paying triple that amount. We're already at what, 196,000 of lease per year, and some of that water again we were not using. And I expressed my concerns to Mr. Quintana and Mr. Romero, Councilman Romero, about doing a long-term plan. And I was talking 40 years, and I would even consider 20-year plan. But a 2-year, I mean, it's a drop in the bucket. It's not going to solve anything. So, and lastly, Mr. Mayor, my experience and my knowledge of what we've done with Story Lake and the waters and storage and so forth, I mean, we could have used this $2 million in other areas that needed repairs to our plant, to our treatment plant. And you know what? I think that money could be better spent bringing up our system up to date. And I don't think that our budget right now at this time can support this kind of a purchase, even though it's a state-funded monies for the first 2 years. After that, it's gone. All of it is gone. So I would like to have a proposal done that takes care of these issues, addresses these issues, and that we look at a long year term. And the first communication was 15 to 20-year term contract. And I don't know what happened to that, but slowly it came down to 2 years. And to me, 2 years is not going to be acceptable. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Mr. Hammond.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, and specifically Councilman Montoya raised a number of issues, but I think it would be helpful for us to go back in time to this time last year, when dire straits, right? Very high level of concern regarding all of the issues that the city was facing relative to just emergency water supply, the whole concerns about the infrastructure at Peterson, Bradner, the water quality issue, everything that we were concerned about. And I'll remind folks that I issued an order at Story Lake to cease and desist any releases for irrigation during the water year last year. This was at tremendous impact to Mr. Quintana and everybody else that took water out of Story Lake for their ongoing needs. That includes the Las Vegas Refuge. They could not use any water last year other than what they were able to receive from the monsoon period, which thankfully came and was not catastrophic. I mean, we had our problems, but I'll also remind folks that we also closed the inlet canal. We let over 7,000 acre feet go by in the river that was not captured at Story Lake. So not only did they lose the use of Story Lake for the entire year for their needs, but they also lost 7,000 acre feet of potential storage because of the horrible quality. We were concerned about it. We listened carefully to your legal and your technical experts about how do we balance the quality in the lake versus the flooding in the city. And I think we did an adequate job. And the state of New Mexico invested, and out of my office, we invested $250,000 in creating an operational heading there that can allow us to operate in the future, because we know that this catastrophic watershed condition is going to create problems for the Gainas River consistently for the next 5 to 10 years. We don't know exactly how that's going to play out. So you are very responsible, you and your technical and legal advisors are taking the responsible steps to assure that you have the water supply needed, whether it's short-term or long-term. But right now, and I've been working with the city and with the Story Lake Project Association to come up with some kind of an agreement, because the city needs multiple pieces of actions in place. The temporary water supply that we see right now is an emergency need. And I'll address how the state comes into it, how the federal water owners come into it, because I've had conversations with the refuge folks about their desires to completely keep their water for their needs, period. They have no interest whatsoever in leasing any of that for alternative uses, because they have a mission to you know, operate their refuge. There's also been discussions about a state water availability for McClure, is it, what's the? McAllister. Yeah, we have a McClure Lake in Santa Fe. McAllister complex there that they want to put back in play, right, over time. And they thought this year would be an opportunity because of the great runoff and whatnot. And then I also want to say, yesterday at the Water Trust Board, Mr. Mayor and Council, we approved $125 million worth of infrastructure funding that included Story Project to do a lining project downstream so that 50% water loss that they have can stay in the lake. So there's multiple pieces coming together, and I think you're doing the very responsible work to build that block. Your relationship with the Story Project, your relationship with Mr. Quintana, the idea that Story, as your expert says, is the city's future. It's the low-hanging fruit, because I know that you've looked at other options of building well fields and pumping them in from the north, and all that is extremely expensive and long-term, right? So my, you know, my years, 40 years of working in water resources, I was actually in a similar position as your city manager and your water resource manager for the city of Santa Fe back in 1995 when they bought it from PNM, and it was a mess. PNM ran it into the ground. We had to invest heavily. We had to look at redundant water supplies, well fields, the McClure Lake I mentioned earlier. Now they're investing another $50 million into a return flow pipeline to the Rio Grande so that they can divert water their San Juan Chama water and reuse it effectively in their system. So that's what municipalities do. They have redundant supplies, they make investments, they plan for the future, and I commend you for taking the important steps. This is just, and then from the state's perspective, I am in the process right now of working with our Department of Homeland Security and Emergency Management to get FEMA off their butt to confirm that this $2 million will be reimbursed, okay? And that's what the governor asked me to do 2 weeks ago, because I've been in conversations with your city manager about the state being good on our promise. The governor sat right here. I was here with her. She said, "We got your back," right? And she's given me her assurance that however that $2 million is going to be made available in $1 million a year kind of increments in any way, shape, or form. I have also got the permission of Senator Campos to share with you that he will do what he has to do to assure that this funding will be here if for reimbursement or whatever the case may be. And there's multiple options, as you know. There's the $100 million loan process that if FEMA says you can use that, we can use that, and then we get reimbursed for that. I mean, it's there. I'm going to say right now that the funding is not an issue. We will figure it out. And because this agreement allows for a little bit of time, there's 45 days from the point of time when you first take delivery of a drop of water, that triggers the 45-day period where we have. So between now and then, I assure you, I will have an answer and the ability to allow for you to have the resources for this purpose. And you know, Councilor Montoya raised some other issues, but the price issue, I think, is as Jay mentioned, it's a point on the curve, and I agree it'll be there for people to say, well, look at that. But here's what I would say to counter that. It's an emergency one-time purchase. It's covered by the state and FEMA. It's only for that horrible incremental need, right? So that when you go into normal water rates negotiations, that price will not be a factor, because now you're looking at long-term, you're looking at all kinds of options, and you can just say, no, we're going to set a different price and we'll negotiate from that point forward. I mean, you can just, you know, you have the power to do that. So the other thing I would recommend is that you take a close look at between now and the time that you may, there is some possibility, in the best of circumstances, with clear water running all year, there is a possibility that you may not use the full 500 acre feet. We just have to admit that is true, because your clear water is your cheapest source of supply. You don't have to pump it. It's there. You just have to treat it and put it in the system. But let me say this, if monsoon rains let go big time, or even this runoff, we get some rain on snow on this runoff, you're going to see some problems, and we're planning for the future of worst case scenarios, right? That's what we're doing with this lease. So my recommendation is use this time to continue building your relationship with the Story Lake folks, and I agree with Mr. Montoya, meeting with the board and all that is very important. Get carryover storage agreement in place, and also get an agreement to allow to use the diversion and the heading to divert your 800 acre feet or whatever else you get in the future from the river, because if your pipeline is occupied with having to pump upstream instead of let it go downstream through that pipeline, then you have options. You have multiple options, and that's the responsible thing for a municipality to do. So I just share that with you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Hammond, and again, welcome to Las Vegas. It's a pleasure having you here.
Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, I'll be right with you, Mr. Montoya. A question to ask you is, so a resolution like this for the 2-year would that give us some latitude to negotiate a longer term with Mr. Quintana for, or maybe 30 or 40 years, 20, 30, 40 years?
I'll defer to your experts, your attorney and
Okay.
Mr. Lazarus on that.
Thank you. Welcome, Mr. Domenici, and welcome to Las Vegas again. Mr. Domenici is our attorney that is involved in water rights and water negotiations for the city of Las Vegas for a bunch of years back. And I just notified the public who you are, Mr. Domenici. And thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Mayor, and good morning, councilors. So the one way to look at this 2-year lease is as an insurance policy. And you have, it's an emergency because you don't want to wait until these conditions that Mr. Hammond talks about are actually in place and then be out searching for water. Water just doesn't work that way. We need to get a contract in place. And I tried to draft this contract to meet what I was instructed at the last meeting, working with your staff. And it's $1 million purchase. Mr. Quintana agreed to 2 years as I was sitting here with him. I put in here that the water can be used for basically a 12-month period because Mr. Quintana told us, and he's correct, he doesn't have the control of storage in that reservoir. That's the project. But he has his water, and I'm trying to get the Story project to agree, his water can be used under this lease for this 12-month period, and then we would start again when the next irrigation season starts, which is roughly April 1st. And so that would give you, we're in the first week of May, so that would give you close to 2 years of insurance, if you will, for this pretty unique situation where you need a significant chunk of water. You need to be able to take it out of that reservoir. The permitting is very easy for this, but we've worked through that with Mr. Hammond. So there's not going to be a delay. I mean, you could essentially, if you get a series of thunderstorms starting tonight, and next week Maria needed this water, we have the tools right here. If the contract's in place, which I hope Mr. Quintana can accept most of this, we tried to meet his terms. If there's some minor adjustments, I think certainly we can work with him. You always do that on contracts. He hasn't, to my knowledge, hasn't really had a chance to go through this. So if we have to revise it, at least we have a very good working draft. We have the input from the state engineer's office and his legal counsel. We have the commitment for the funding. We have a time period when we can use this water. We have the permitting in place, and it gives 2 years, effectively 2 years to work on these other pieces, which some of those we'd like to put in place sooner than 2 years, most likely. A carryover of this water would make it more valuable. So we'd like to probably start those discussions immediately, just so we can't have everything all at once, but that would be with Story Project. Can we carry over this water that we're obtaining through this lease? The other is using their diversion, as Mr. Hammond stated. I don't think we need to wait for 2 years on that either. Those two items should be put front and center as trying to work through those really as soon as you get this contract in place, or at least get to a point we're not working on this. Long-term, you have 2 years to develop your strategy, and also, frankly, to get a feel for the funding that's going to come out of FEMA. So one of the real reasons we did this for 2 years, I understand Mr. Quintana made 2 long-term proposals, but FEMA is not ready to make those proposals. They're not in a position where they have deadlines facing them and concrete proposals from us with timelines that they need to get back to us. So we were in a position, I think, as a city of potentially making a long-term commitment without having that FEMA reassurance. So the 2 years is to, in my view, is to line up FEMA to understanding pretty much what Jay said, which is, and Mr. Hammond, as a result of these fires, we need a better relationship with Story and more access to their assets and more access to their members' water. And we have 2 years to do that. There's various ways to do that, including requests for proposals, direct negotiations. Every municipality has a water acquisition strategy, generally speaking. Mike could probably confirm that. And they're sort of locally based, because you're based on who's out there that's a possible provider of those rights. So you can't bring Albuquerque's acquisition strategy or Rio Rancho's up here. You have to develop your own, and it's probably going to focus significantly on Story and Story's members. You probably wouldn't exclude other people, but you need to realize it needs to take into account that's your low-hanging fruit, if you want to call it that, which I agree with also. But we've tried through your staff and the state engineer's assistance to tie up the funding contingency, which I think is very important, and to get the language worked out for this 2-year lease that we think Mr. Quintana can live with, and it gives the city the most insurance we can under these circumstances. So, but I'm willing to go into detail with this contract, provisions, or consider anything else that, you, the mayor, or the councilors would like me to address, or information you'd like to share with me.
Thank you for your advice, Mr. Domenici. It's greatly appreciated.
You're welcome.
Mr. Mayor, thank you. Just one more comment on the FEMA side of it.
Sure.
Their rules are set up to try to keep the situation whole based on the disaster, right? And so when they look at what they can do, especially in the short term, they look at, is it an emergency? Is it something that is not a long-term fix? Because that takes, they don't want to step in the shoes and be responsible for something that the city would ordinarily do under a normal planning and infrastructure purpose, right, for their long term. And I would argue that they need, one of the emergency pieces is your pretreatment plant that needs to be a permanent plant, right? So that's one piece, and then some of the other things that you're gonna make your case on make sense. But my understanding of their rules and why we're having a little bit of struggle with them is they look at it very carefully in that they wanna respond to the emergency, they wanna keep you whole during that period. But when it starts going into the long term, they start getting cold feet. So that's why it's very important that this is a 2-year short-term emergency agreement. And I think we can then sell it to FEMA. And then this, what I've been tasked to do by the governor is make sure you get everything, our ducks in a row with FEMA, such that the state gets reimbursed or you get reimbursed on the loan or whatever we decide works best to get you the money the quickest way possible. And so I just wanted to make that clarification.
Let me clarify my point. When we're talking long-term, I think we're talking more the Hermit's Peak Relief Act and those funds, which are tied to the impacts of the fire. And if you didn't have this fire, you would have a much less long-term concern about the quality of your water coming down and your ability to utilize that water. So maybe I misspoke when I said get a better feeling from FEMA for the long term. I'm talking more a better feeling for sort of the FEMA arm that is the Hermit's Peak Relief Act, or possibly a Federal Tort Claims Act claim, as saying you've increased the cost of city infrastructure because you've jeopardized our water supply, and we have to put something in place to take the place of that security that you took away from us. And so we have a time period to work through that process and try to get commitments that assist us in making long-term commitments.
Wonderful.
He's already drafting the brief, I think.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again for your advice. Mr. Romero, did you have a question?
I had a question to Leo, Jay, and Maria. As far as the pretreatment plant, let's, given good case scenario, we get $100 million pretreatment plant. What water are we going to be using for that if we don't go with this? So what's the plan? Like what water right now? What's the plan?
So you're talking about the sediment removal system at Story? Or are you talking about
The pretreatment plant that we're, the
treatment system
pretreatment.
at Montezuma? So, I mean, we're going to be using story water. We'll either use story water, the 800 acre feet that we
So
already have.
I guess let me clarify, let me give you a scenario, or just like we had last year with Bradner Dam was compromised. Our two dams get compromised. We have our pretreatment plant. What water are we gonna use at that time?
It would be story water. It would be river water through story.
But only what we have currently allocated.
800 acre feet. So currently we have, we are at 97% full in all of our reservoirs. So we have just a little under 800 in Story. Bradner is full.
So we would only depend on the 800 acre feet. The worst case scenario, our two dams get. And I guess, Mr. Mayor, the point I'm trying to make here is that, you know, right now, we could put 100 million into a dam, we could put all the money into a pretreatment plant, we can do all that. But today, this day and age, tomorrow, something happens, guess what? We don't have no water. We're not gonna get, we can't miraculously cure brackish water, we can't do none of that. And I guess that's where my frustration has this, and, you know, and I apologize because I don't know, I did notice, Jay, on your billings that you were looking as far as the issues is, you know, ownership of water rights and stuff there at Story Lake. So I don't know, you know, obviously we did the research, so why wouldn't we reach out to other members? The reason why, and I'm gonna say this, the reason why I reached out to Mr. Quintana is because of this negotiation last year that we had at $2 million. It was going nowhere. I don't know how, you know, how everybody else felt, but, you know, I sat there every single week giving out water. And to deal with, you know, people worried about, are we gonna have water tomorrow? Are we gonna have water? You know, that touched me. And I was like, you know, what are we doing? We're not doing anything fast enough. You know, we could talk about all the funding and everything, all the miraculous, you know, miracles that FEMA can give us, but we didn't deal with, we don't have the water. You know, I mean, amazingly, we're able to put water in Bradner and pull from the top. I mean, the things that we were given and the things that happened, you know, we're in a good case scenario, you know, thank God for that. But if we don't have those, what are we gonna do? What are, I mean, this is the reason why I wanted this, and yes, I know Councilor Montoya brought that maybe we're paying more than what we are, but you know what, 20 years ago, had we paid probably, you know, $50 an acre foot or whatever from Mr. Quintana's family, you know, we wouldn't be in the situation we are today, paying what we're paying. The question, the concern that I have here today is if we do a short term only for 2 years, is that we know that the West, you know, water is turning into gold, or probably more than gold right now. So in 2 years, Mr. Quintana, that 2,000 might go up. You know, today we might be paying more, but, you know, 2 years or 3 years, and in 2 years again, let's bring the reality. If we could have a new council here and they say, you know what, forget that, you know, we've done this, you know, we've done this. Councils have had the opportunity to address issues, and they've lingered on 20 years, and here we are today, you know, working on this. And I'm in the state, you know, and people could say what they want. They could say, hey, well, you guys are meddling, but you know what, experts, you know, you guys have been around, and I'm sure you guys get tired of us, you know what I mean, after so many years, but we still haven't fixed the issues that we've had for 20 years. And I guess, you know, I apologize if there's frustration. It just, you know, the reality of us only having 20 days last year and having to hand out water. Last year, we were talking about how are we gonna truck water in. I mean, come on, really? You know, when there was water at Story Lake and, you know, yes, we could have used it, but we were talking about hauling in water. And at the end of the day, you know, we have to have good relationships with everybody. And, you know, I'd hate to, you know, with the Acequias or with the Story Lake, you know, we need to work together. And this is one way that I think we take care of our issue. I kind of understand where you're going, but I guess the commitment here is that from me anyway, and I guess, you know, when it comes down to it, we'll see where everybody else stands, but do we want to just do this in 2 years and then go through the whole hassle and everything of, you know, trying to negotiate again? And we can just put the realities in there, you know, councils change, leadership changes, there's a lot of things to take into account, and I don't know, I'm willing to make that, you know, take that step here today and make a decision that, you know, probably get criticized, but you know what, I'm not here to worry about elections or anything like that. I'm here to take care of what we need to take care of here today while I'm here. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Romero. And I hear the excitement in your voice. You know, I think the community would feel a lot better if the entire community knew that we were okay for a long time. And that's always been, you know, all of our goals is to make sure that the community has plenty of water. And I think an agreement like this is they don't come around all the time. And it's a good opportunity, and they are our best case scenarios. Our reservoirs are full, the lake is full, the runoff is good. For now, you know, once the monsoon season starts in July, who knows what the condition of the water is going to be, if we're going to even be able to save any of that water. And then it would also give our ability to lax a little bit on this stage 3, stage 4, stage 2, stage 1 thing that our residents have lived with for, what, 20-some years since we put this in place. We've been on one stage of conservancy at one point all the time. We've never been off those stages. And I think it would just give our ability to breathe a little bit and encourage our, of course, residents to continue to conserve, but to be able to water a garden, wash a car outside, play outside with your kids, you know, with the hose, those things that we're not used to at all, you know, in the community. So, do you have any? Yes, Barbara.
Just have a,
Okay, Mr. Montoya, after Ms. Casey.
Okay, one more after everybody.
item 13 says that the agreement is contingent upon the state of New Mexico making complete payment of the amounts. And so, my question is to, Mr. Hammond. You're focusing with the Department of, Homeland Security to make sure that FEMA will pay for this 2-year, agreement if we decide to go that route. How will you help us in getting money for a longer term lease? Will you go to the Hermit's Peak Relief Act for money, or where is that other money going to be coming from for a longer term? Anybody?
Mr. Mayor, Councilwoman Casey, I think what your legal advisor stated is that there has to be a strong case made under the Hermit's Peak Relief Act that gap be filled by the federal government. And as you know, between the work of Senator Campos and other legislators, the gap, the loan gap that was provided, the $100 million for any community impacted, and it has to be a local government community that actually gets a little checkbox by FEMA that the project and that's what I'm working on right now. But the little checkbox that FEMA has to give to DFA that, yes, this qualifies as for reimbursement. That's the first step. And so I can, for this agreement, I can structure a memo about the different paths. But I can tell you, I've talked to the Chief of Staff, Teresa Casados, 2 weeks ago about this, and she says the governor's going to stand by her commitment that we talked about a year ago about $2 million for emergency water supply purchase. We couldn't close the deal as Councilman Romero stated, but we can take a good step now and then build that relationship going forward with other things that need to be done with the Story Project folks. And we'll be behind you. Personally, as a water resource, person my entire career, I think we have the obligation to help you work through all of your water rights issues. Your attorney, Mr. Domenici, stated that we have a permitting issue, but it's a very simple one because it's an emergency. It's just a matter of issuing you the emergency permit for this 2-year agreement that allows for the transfer of the purpose. It's going from irrigation to municipal, and the place. It's moving from Mr. Quintana's land to the entire city. So that has to be in place, but it's gonna happen quick. So there won't be any delays from the state engineer's office on this. And we will continue to work during this period of time before the payment is due to make sure that we have our ducks in a row to be able to put the funding in place to cover the payment. So that's what the governor told me to do, and I'm doing it. And then the bigger picture stuff is what your attorney advised is to make the case, and the state will be 100% behind you on that too.
Very well. Mr. Montoya?
Yeah, what I'm trying to do here also is assure us that these waters are going to be of good quality waters that we're going to be able to run through our filtering system. So if the lake is contaminated this next year for whatever purpose to the level that we can't run it through our system, then we can't get any water at all from Story Lake. So what guarantee do we have on that? And then as far as what Mr. Quintana and all the rest of the Sequia owners lost last year, I mean, the city is not responsible for that. They should go after the federal government. They should be penalized, not the city. We had nothing to do with that. It was their doing, and you, the state engineer's office, that shut down the inlet to Story Lake at that time. You know, and as far as long time coming, the head gates, we've asked for those head gates a long time ago, and nothing came about from their state engineer's office. And in 2006, we asked for $36 million to realign the same acequia that you want to align for $125 million today. And we were refused by the state and the federal government. So this is long time coming, and all those should have been done at the time that we requested them to be done. We would have saved the same percentage of water to evaporation or leakage out of that acequia, and that water would still be overflowed in Story Lake every year. But we got denied. So I'm okay for a lease, but I want a long-term lease. I don't want something that's we're going to face again in 2 years. The federal government did this to our community, did this to Story Lake, did this to everybody else down the river. They ought to be responsible for this. All of us, including your office, the governor's office, and everybody's office, should go after the federal government to make this a long-term commitment to make Las Vegas whole. We're going to be facing the same thing in 2 years, guaranteed. And you're not going to guarantee me that we're going to use that water either. So, I mean, I'm a little bit, you might want to say I'm a little bit uptight, but I am, because they destroyed our livelihood. And they ought to pay for it. This is just a Band-Aid. That's all it is. But I'm okay to work through an agreement, to go through the process and make sure that all parties are covered in this agreement. And I don't know where the $2,000 an acre came from. And if that's the loss that Mr. Quintana took a bidding on last year, I mean, I don't know why we should be paying for it, but, you know, I still say that we're setting a precedent. I don't know, but I'm not an attorney, but I would say that we are. And I'll leave with this comment. I want to thank you all for your efforts and for coming to Las Vegas. And I thank you for paying attention to us. I mean, money is not everything. We need the water, and we've been crying for storage all along, and no one's heard us before. So I hope this works. It's like the fire station training center that we asked for. I mean, we got no answers. They all went to Albuquerque. So who's listening to us? You know. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Montoya.
Mr. Mayor, I would like to hear from Mr. Quintana. It's your water. How many years are you willing to work with the city to lease your water.
Sure.
Mr. Mayor, if I could add to that while he's getting here, I just want to apologize real quick to Mr. Quintana. I know that, you know, and this was not from council, but, you know, this whole 2-year thing in here, you know, the whole discussion was kind of long-term and, you know, from the experts, I guess that's where that came in. So I guess, thank you, Councilor Casey. You know, we want to hear from you because you kind of hear, you know, you hear what our experts are telling us, right? And then kind of see.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I thought it was always open to the long-term lease. I don't know where it came up to just a 2-year agreement. I haven't seen this agreement that Mr. Domenici is talking about. Never seen it, never got sent to me. So that's something that myself and my water attorney and my personal attorney is gonna have to review. But I'm open to a long-term lease. I think everybody in this room majority is from this community, and my entire adult life we've been a struggle with water. Has nothing to do with this fire, and Councilman Montoya keeps on mentioning about federal government, FEMA this, FEMA that, should be paying. Well, I think the city needs to start standing on their own leg and start figuring out future. You guys are talking about the water we're currently using. We've never talked about the city growing, and you guys are gonna need more water if you want this community to grow. And I think that's ultimately what you guys are in this position for, being council, looking for the growth of the city. You guys can't do it without figuring out how to acquire more water. I have addressed to the rest of the members of the association that I am going to be entering into possibly a lease. Everybody has the same option if they choose to. Mr. Montoya did mention that he has not been invited to any meetings. The city of Las Vegas is a shareholder. They have 36 shares, I believe, something like that. We do have an annual meeting once a year, and a member from the city of Las Vegas is more than welcome to go to that meeting once a year. The board meetings that we do have are for the current board. We're not governed by the Open Meetings Act. We don't have open meetings just like the public, like every other entity. We're a private organization, and but you guys are more than welcome to attend. Leo, Mr. Maestas, has talked to me about it, and I have let him know when we do have our annual meetings, and he has been. He attended one board meeting already. So I'm open to a long term, and I think it's only wise the city of Las Vegas does a long term. And the reason why it's in the best interest of the city to work with my family is because we're the largest private shareholder of the lake. The federal government, I've already talked to the attorneys from the Department of Interior, and everybody keeps on saying that maybe the federal government will give them water. They are not interested in giving you guys water. Without water, that is not a wildlife refuge. They use it for bird fowl. They need water for the birds. They are not going to allow anybody to take the water. The attorneys have already put me on notice that if the city or the state of New Mexico tries to do it on an emergency like they did last year and take the water, they will file an injunction. They are going to need their water, and they are taking their water currently right now. So there's not going to be any available water from the feds this year because they've already taken probably 50% of the water usage. So I don't know, everybody's always thinking about taking, and Councilman Montoya mentioned he was here 17 years ago. What has changed in 17 years? We're still in the same boat we've been in the last 40. It's your guys' duty to change that. And you guys have a great option, I think, in front of you, but it's up to you guys. How you guys want to address that?
Thank you very much, Mike. I appreciate you being here and willing to attend the meetings. It's my understanding that this agreement was, and I guess I asked earlier and Mr. Domenici answered, but if we go with this today, it would give us time to do a long-term agreement in the next month or so to bring to the council?
Nobody talked to me about if it was going to be short-term, long-term. My first initial options were long-term. The one I think was a 25 and the other one was a 40 because that's what you guys had discussed. This is news to me that now it's going to be a 2-year. It's kind of hard for me to do a short-term like that for the fact that if I go plant my crop like Jay mentioned, it's a 5-year. So it kind of puts me in a situation. So I think it's up to the council as to how they want to approach this, and then it'll be up to myself and my council as to how we negotiate that agreement.
And I'm more interested in a long-term, like 20, 30 years. I think you sent us yet one yesterday for, I think, was it 10?
10 years.
Yeah.
It's kind of more or less, our alfalfa cycle with proper fertilizer and proper water on it, we can get 7, 8 years out of the field. So that's why I did 10 year. I think that's the bare minimum. If we could do a 7, if that's possible, but a 2 year is kind of really tough to do.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Quintana.
So,
Mr. Hammond?
Mr. Mayor, I had one question. and
Yeah.
I don't know, Mike, or to Mr. Dominici, just kind of what I gathered from, from Mike and from Mr. Dominici is that based off of kind of the reimbursement cycle of that, the emergency, this whole 2 year qualifies under that. Being that, with that said, if we were, and I guess maybe it's Mr. Dominici, if we were to agree this, but also within our direction and motions and things, where we give direction or approve, a long-term lease within this, but still, I mean, you know what I mean? So we approve this, but then say we want a long-term lease of 20 years or whatever, because, Mr. Quintana did give us a schedule on some of those things. And then have you guys work out the detail on that other one, because I just, this 2 year, I understand the whole funding and, getting the reimbursed for the 2 million, based off of the emergency. But I also want the commitment here from this thing that we're not just gonna settle for the 2 year, and that we want whatever we decide here tonight, that we want it long-term, if that makes sense. And of course, I know that language would probably have to, but I want that commitment here tonight, whether, if we decide, maybe you guys wanna just go 2 years, and you go 2 years, but I do want that commitment here tonight. I don't wanna go through this again. I think, the price stays the same. The only thing is the escalator every single year. And I think the only thing that changed, Mr. Quintana, on the one that you submitted was basically you gave us that first 2 year with no escalator, so nothing's changed from what you've developed, what you've sent the first time till now. And again, this all falls on, the need, and at the same time, there's plenty of other, water rights holders and things of that they knew our intent. They knew, the dire need that we were with water, and nobody ever stepped up. So, it goes both ways. So, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
At our last discussion, Mayor asked me if we could do without that escalator for the first 2 years to help you guys with the funding, since there was already an allocation of a dollar amount from the state. And I did put that in that letter of intent, so the first year there would be no escalator, but from there on would have to be. But never did I know it was gonna be 2 years, and that's something that if that's what the city is wanting, then I would have to sit, really think about it and see if I wanna pursue doing a lease.
Well, not to lose out on this opportunity, Mr. Quintana, we can move forward with this, because this is a sure thing, and give direction to the city manager and to city staff and our attorneys and our experts to work out a long-term deal with you for 20 years in the next month.
It's totally up to the council, but I'm open to it.
That's just an idea.
You're open to that, Mr.
Yeah, I'm open.
Quintana?
I think it's beneficial for the city and for us if we did do a long-term. It's hard being back and forth, and I don't think it's something that we can be back and forth. We do 2 years, and then
You guys don't need it for 2 years, then it's gonna be something that's gonna have to be the long term, or it's just not gonna work for the family or for the city.
I think that would be the way to go, in terms of, being fair to you, as someone that has to depend on their crops, to feed your family, so to speak. And we have to provide for the citizens of the community, so, I personally like the mayor's, suggestion. And if you're willing to work with us with that would, I think, be the best way to go.
absolutely. Like Councilmember
Romero mentioned, I have put it out there to the rest of the members of the association, and we are gonna be
having another annual meeting. I'd love for somebody from the council to attend that, so you can really pass on some of that information and see if there's that shareholder that has 1 share or 5 shares and they're interested in leasing it to you guys, well, then all for that. But please, let me be clear, this lease is with Michael Quintana. It has nothing to do with the association. This is between Michael Quintana and the city of Las Vegas.
That's understood. Mr. Hammond?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I also want to make it clear from the state's perspective that we're, the governor's commitment is for the emergency piece, whether it's 1 or 2 years, however it plays out. And then beyond that, we'll back your efforts to try to find the long-term funding associated with Herman's Peak effort. But as far as the state being in the game for covering a longer-term lease, we'd be in the back seat at that point.
Very well. So, yes, Mr. Lazarus. Thank you, Mr. Quintana.
Mr. Mayor, Council, I'd like to make a suggestion, and I talked with Mr. Quintana about this, and Councilor Romero brought this up a little while ago, and I agreed. I'd like to see at least a 40-year lease with another 40-year option, okay? Because if we're going to grow, we can't, I think you used the word Band-Aid, okay, and Councilor Montoya did too. If we're going to grow, because we've got to, okay? If we're going to grow, we need the water security, okay? And we need to be able to show businesses and residents that we've got it. So I would suggest that to council, and we had the opportunity like 20 years ago to purchase the whole non-federal share, and the council at the time decided not to do it, okay? And I worked my butt off with Robert Quintana, to try and make it happen, and council didn't want to do it, okay? I would suggest, I know what I want, but I'm going to suggest, that we go for a 40-year lease, however it works. It's a 40-year deal, okay? However Mr. Domenici and Mr. Quintana and the rest of the folks would do it. 40-year deal with another 40 years on top of it, and maybe another 40 years after that. Because really, at the state engineer office, as municipalities, we prepare 40-year water plans, okay? And we all know how fast 40 years can really go by, unfortunately, for those of us that are older, okay? So I'm really strongly urging 40 plus 40 and maybe another 40. Thank you.
Just for the record, Mr. Lazarus, my primary meeting with Mr. Quintana included the language of 40 years. Whether it's renewable for the next 40 years or however we want to word that, I think it's going to be left up to the wordsmithing and our attorneys and Mr. Quintana's attorneys to come up with an agreement. But that was my primary meeting with Mr. Quintana.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor,
Mr.
I just want to add one thing, and it's kind of adds on. I know we're looking on the long term, but here as a governing body, it's our one of our sole duties is the budget, and we have to be creative. I could see, with the enterprise fund, I'm not an expert, but I do depend on our experts. But I think that there is ways to be creative. As far as, beyond the 2 years, when it's our, sole responsibility. Thank you, Mr. Hammond, for saying that. But, I want to be clear is that was my understanding is that, we're as a governing body are going to have to understand where are we going to come up with that to continue this lease. And, we just have to be creative. We can't just settle because we went through this past year, you can't just pull water out of anywhere, and we can't, come up with enough water bottles to have our community survive, you know what I mean? So that's our job, and that's our city managers and our finance person, whoever that may be, is that if it comes down to it and we have to come up with, the funds with that, because I think the dollars are a little bit easier to find than what the water is, as we've come across. So I just want to make that known that, it was the understanding that after 2 years that we were going to have to, as a body, come up and find a way to come up with that $1 million. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor?
Ms. Casey.
Mr. Mayor, I would like to move that we approve the emergency water lease contract for bulk purchase of water for 2 years as with the language that the state engineer added, with the proviso that for the May 17th meeting, we have an additional lease agreement for anywhere from 25 to 40 years so that we can do something that's a little bit more permanent for our community.
There's a motion on the floor by Ms. Casey. Second.
Mr. Mayor, I second it, but I just, Mr. Quintana, are you, you know, of course, it's, you know, it's the governing body, but you're okay if that happens? Okay. I second that, Mr. Mayor.
There's a motion by Ms. Casey, a second by Mr. Romero. Please roll call us.
Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Montoya?
Yeah, I don't have a current present other than Mr. Dominici, but does this motion really state that it doesn't go through if we don't have a 40-year plan?
I'm sorry, we can't hear you. Maybe if you speak a little lower.
My question, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, my question was, since we don't have our city attorney in the house, and we have Mr. Dominici, does this motion state that if we don't have a 40-year plan within 1 month's time, this whole thing don't go through?
I guess it's a legal question for you, Mr. Domenici.
It's really based on the language of the motion. So, the one issue I want to bring up with this motion is procurement code. I think with this emergency, we're okay with the procurement code, but I certainly want to talk to Leo about the 40-year, what procurement requirements are associated with that. But just so I can be clear, and I'll mention Mr. Quintana, because I was here last time, and we did, in my recollection, discuss this 2-year lease because we wanted to get you paid before you could, you know, I know your window's closing or maybe closed already, but we wanted something, we could get the funding approved, which has happened fairly quickly, actually, in the big scheme of things. Last year, we couldn't put this deal together. Right. We actually have a deal on the table, subject to your review and approval, where you would get $2 million for the next 2 years, and you could forego planting because you're gonna get paid. I know that doesn't solve your problems 40 years, but I would say, my comments on this are May 17th, I think is too quick for a 40-year commitment. It's just 10 days from now, we just do not have the time to draft that and consider it. And we may have a procurement issue involved. So I would ask that the motion be clear that the council is approving this contract regardless of what happens in the next 40 days. And this contract can be, and requesting it be presented and executed as soon as possible. So there is a two-way commitment, binding. So we know we have the water, and Mr. Quintana knows he has his money. And then if I would just ask a little more time, perhaps your next meeting after May 17th, to let us come back and negotiate with Mr. Quintana, review the procurement issues, and come back to you. And if we are able to present a proposed long-term lease document, do that. If we think we have to do a procurement issue, give you the options on how that might occur to satisfy what I hear are your objectives. And one of the objectives I'm hearing is, and one of the things Mr. Quintana pointed out accurately, is when you, and this can be subject to different opinions, but when you buy water, there are advantages to buying it from one person rather than multiple transactions. But in your procurement, we may have that flexibility to say we're looking for this quantity of water, which might lead in that direction. But I think you still have to have somewhat of an open-ended procurement process is likely.
Okay.
To really
Thank
meet
you,
that.
Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Montoya?
Yes, the other part of my question was, so where do we leave the other stakeholders on this motion? Without an option?
That would fall within the procurement thing.
Because this motion according to Mr. Quintana, is only for Mr. Quintana and Mr. Quintana only. It's not, it doesn't include any other owner, or shareholder.
Right.
So that leaves them out completely.
Yes. It's only within, this is only pertaining to Mr. Quintana at this point. If there are other procurement issues that we have to run into, it may involve other users. But at this point, this agreement is strictly between Mr. Quintana and the city of Las Vegas.
Well, Mr. Mayor, I again, I'm interested in a long-term plan and,
Well, that's what we're working on. If we pass this today with the provision, and Ms. Casey will change her motion, that within a month's time or the second meeting in June, we will have prepared and looked at the long-term contract for 40 years.
and I understand that, Mr. Mayor, and our advisor there, Mr. Dominic, is saying that 30 days is not, enough time to prepare that long-term, contract.
He said 10 days,
So that-
extending it to
or
the
10
second
days.
meeting in June.
So 30 days is gonna be enough.
We should be able to engage in negotiations and perform our procurement analysis within 30 days.
So if we don't come to an agreement on a long-term plan, this deal still goes through,
Yes.
okay?
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to amend my motion to accept the emergency water lease contract for bulk purchase of water for the 2-year lease, with the proviso that we just discussed, with the recommendations that Mr. Dominici has made, and that we have that subsequent lease agreement come before the council at the second June meeting.
Mr. Mayor, I agree to that amended motion.
There's a motion by Ms. Casey, second by Mr. Romero. Roll call us, please.
Counselor Romero?
Yes.
Counselor Olivari?
Yes.
Counselor Casey?
Yes.
Counselor Montoya?
Nope, I'm interested in a long-term lease.
I have a,
I'm sorry, we couldn't hear you. Can you,
I said, no, I'm interested in a long-term lease.
okay, thank you.
I have a motion by Counselor Casey, a second by Counselor Romero. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Motion carries.
Thank
Mr. Mayor, I
you.
move that we adjourn.
There's a motion to adjourn the meeting by Ms. Casey, second. All in favor? Meeting adjourned. Thank you for coming.
Training that I